I atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where sometimes the universe rewards you for procrastinating. As I was reminded about 4 hours ago when I sat down to write what I thought was going to be the news roundup and discovered shit, Joe Biden just quit the race and he announced it on Twitter? Like, really, Joe? That's where we are now? The point being, I guess I'm not writing a news roundup at all, am I? I guess I'm doing a monologue of hot takes on this very momentous historic event. But before we do all that, since we are civilized people and not barbarian savages who open shows without proper salutations, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. So glad you could join us this evening. And needless to say, there is much to unpack. Christ, we already had much to unpack as it was, since, after all, it's only been 8 days since the former president was struck in the head by an assassin's bullet, and astoundingly, inexplicably, intolerably, the idiot Secret Service director still has a job. That was supposed to still be the hot topic on the table today, in addition to the Republican convention, the pot on the front burner, if you will. But then, like a bolt from the blue party, we're hit with the news that for the first time in recorded history, a president has dropped out of the race by tweeting out a photograph of a letter. I think most people would agree that a momentous decision like that maybe ought to be announced in a televised address to the nation, but I guess that just ain't how Joe Biden rolls, is it? God damn it, I earned my COVID vacation, and I'm not letting you assholes put that orange spray paint on me one more time. Just put out a written statement. No, I don't need to proofread it. I haven't proofread a goddamn thing since I became president. Ain't gonna start now. Go away, you bother me. I've been awake for 45 minutes. I need a good long nap. I'm freaking exhausted. Now, in terms of putting this event into some sort of proper historical context, I would categorize it as just short of unprecedented. There's only been, to the best of this reporter's knowledge, one other time in our history when an incumbent president has announced his candidacy for re-election and conducted a campaign and then quit before the convention. The one other time was Lyndon Johnson in 1968, but that was an altogether different thing in a couple of different ways. First, because Johnson quit the race very early on in the campaign, after the first primary, in fact, which he did win, but he won it by such a shockingly, unexpectedly small margin for an incumbent president that he took it as the writing on the wall in terms of his ultimate chances of being renominated. And he figured it would be less humiliating to quit early on in the race rather than lose outright in the end. And he was probably right. But this is the first time a president has ever quit after the primaries are done, when he has long since secured enough delegates to clinch the nomination. And Lyndon Johnson is about to feature in this monologue for a second time, because in a post-1960 world, I don't think anybody is sure exactly what happens now. You see, before 1960, the primaries and the caucuses always existed to some extent, and you could use them to rack up some delegates and maybe increase your national profile if you were a minor fringe candidate, but there was little about them that was actually binding. They were mostly just informal straw polls of voter opinion more than anything else. When it came time to go to the National Party convention, none of the delegates you earned in the primaries were actually obliged to vote for you when it came down to the real thing. And it was John F. Kennedy, who wasn't initially seen as a major contender for the nomination in 1960, who was the first guy who said, you know what? I'm going to go contest every primary, build my national profile that way, and when we get to the convention, maybe my delegates will be confident enough to stick with me. Meanwhile, Lyndon Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader, who was seen by everybody as the number one contender for the nomination that year, he was laughing at Kennedy for running around the country wasting all that energy on the stupid primaries. That's not what serious candidates do, young man. Serious candidates save it for the convention. That's where you do your horse trading. But as we know, Kennedy wound up being right, and Johnson wound up being rather spectacularly wrong. So wrong, in fact, that he had to settle for the indignity of being Kennedy's running mate. And ever since Kennedy established that model, the parties have both moved inexorably in that direction, where the primaries are where we actually choose the nominees, and the convention is more of just a four-night made-for-TV political rally. The parties have found that they like this arrangement much better than the old one, because it gives them far more direct control over who the nominee winds up being, and it eliminates the possibility, which always exists in an open brokered convention of some unknown dark horse candidate emerging out of left field at the 11th hour and making off with the nomination, which has happened a few times over the years, with the Republicans especially, Rutherford Hayes and James Garfield being probably the two most famous examples. But the parties really don't like that sort of uncertainty, and especially not here in the era of big money politics where the donor class effectively makes all of the rules. It's not a strong look if you have to fundraise on behalf of a general election candidate who nobody has ever heard of before the convention and has no national brand identity. And the primary system exists largely for the purpose of forestalling such eventualities. And the media obviously like this arrangement very much as well, because it enables them to pretty much do never-ending election coverage 12 months every year and hold debate after debate after debate after debate, even when we're a year and a half or more out from the election. The midterms end, then you slide right into the next presidential cycle. I mean, hey, you got a 24-hour fake news cycle. You got to fill it with some kind of content, am I right? But long story short, anybody on your television who says they know exactly what is going to take place at the Democrat convention in Chicago a few weeks from now, or who says it's already a fait accompli that Kamala Harris becomes the presumptive nominee just because Biden endorsed her, is lying. Because nobody has the faintest idea how that convention's going to go. It's a funny thing about living through an unprecedented set of circumstances. Things get really unpredictable in a big damn hurry. And let's not pretend there is anything resembling unity in the Democrat Party over whether the California cackler should even get the top spot on the ticket, because there is not. Just like there was still no broad consensus up until this afternoon on whether Biden should quit or stay in the race. But there are still some Democrats who prefer to live in political reality. And the political reality is that Kamala Harris is the most intensely disliked vice president since people first ever started keeping track of such things. It should be impossible to be an unpopular vice president, but through her peculiar and quite unique combination of crippling incompetence and a total inability to speak her own native language intelligibly, Kamala Harris has managed to pull it off. And there is no mechanism, so far as I'm aware, in the DNC bylaws that enables a presumptive nominee like Joe Biden, under the current rules, to simply transfer his pledged delegates to a replacement of his choosing. So I would expect the first day of the convention to be taken up with a veritable orgy of very hasty rule changes that seek to make this replacement process they're trying to pull off as seamless as possible. Will the delegates vote in favor of said rule changes? Who the hell knows? Will there be some delegates at the convention who are pledged to Joe Biden who don't necessarily want to vote for Kamala Harris? Yes, of course. It's impossible that there wouldn't be. But here's the question that's at the top of my mind. Is there any way for the DNC to thread this needle where they grease the skids to get Kamala into the top spot while also precluding the emergence of an old-fashioned dark horse candidate who swoops into the convention and runs off with the nomination after 47, 48 ballots, James Garfield style? I don't know that there is. I don't know that you can do the one and the other at the same time with the same set of rule changes, but I guess we will see soon enough. There's another question, though, that is far more pressing and consequential than who winds up at the top of the Democrat ticket on 6 November. And it's the question, should Joe Biden remain in office until next January? To put it more bluntly, if a president's mental infirmities preclude him from standing for re-election, don't they also preclude him from effectively discharging the duties of his office? It's a rhetorical question, obviously, because any honest person who has been paying any sort of attention for the last several years knows it's been quite some time since Joe Biden was capable of effectively discharging the duties of the presidency, if indeed he ever was. And I think Baghdad Buckwheat, the world's worst press secretary for the world's worst president, is going to have the most difficult presser of her tenure tomorrow morning, because the duty is going to fall to her, of all people, to come up with some sort of rationale for how her boss is fit to remain in office, but unfit by his own admission to stand for re-election, or, by extension, to continue in office past next January. What's she going to come up with? Unclear. I just know that I am totally here for it. Now, What's the immediate downside of what's taken place in the last several hours? Well, we already had an administration full of feckless douchebags who couldn't power project their way out of a wet paper bag, led by a chief executive who probably can't go to the bathroom by himself. But by this action today, we have fully exposed our neck to every bad guy and potential adversary in the world who seeks an opportune moment to do us harm. We have sent up the official smoke signal that says there is no hand on the tiller, steady or otherwise, so please feel free to abuse us at your leisure. If I'm China, I'm taking this as a 6-month window to move on Taiwan. If I'm Iran, I'm taking this as a 6-month window to move on Israel. If I'm Russia, I see a 6-month window in which to consolidate my gains in eastern Ukraine. If I'm a scumbag dictator in Central or South America, I see a 6-month window in which to finish the work of emptying out my prisons and my insane asylums and sending everybody up to the United States. So where am I going with this? Well, I think there's a better than 50-50 chance that Joe Biden has resigned the presidency by the next time we convene 7 days from now. There are 1,000 reasons, and we've only briefly run through a few of the more screamingly obvious ones here, why the thing Joe Biden is attempting to do, which is quit as the candidate and remain as the president, is untenable and unacceptable and cannot be allowed to happen. When Lyndon Johnson quit, first of all, it was way the hell before he became the presumptive nominee. And second of all, it was not because he lacked the mental capacity to remain in office. It was because he knew he was fixing to get his ass kicked and he wanted to avoid the embarrassment. Joe Biden, on the other hand, can make no such claim. And so here are the similarities between the two cases end. And here I was, all ready to celebrate the fact that after 93 years in the wilderness as a neglected, marginalized population, we bearded Americans are finally represented once again on a major party presidential ticket. After this nearly century-long depressing succession of naked-faced Nancy boys, thank you, President Trump, for being the man who finally heard our plaintive cries for justice and representation and moved to provide some small measure of redress in this decades-long injustice. In addition, and I know my co-host will support me on this, we hereby grant you membership in the Beardless Men We Trust Club. It's very exclusive, a high honor indeed. Your plaque and membership card will be in the mail. And now, before my voice gives out, I pass the controls to the man who is going to get us out of this flat spin, my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.